We are still pretty early in the 2025 recruiting cycle. A lot can and will happen between now and December, but so far, number one Notre Dame still off to that hot start with 20 total commits. Closely behind them with the highest per player rating is Ohio State, but the focus of our next segment, we put it in bold there for you, is the number 6 class in Oklahoma. So let's head to somewhere, I guess, in driving distance of Norman, Oklahoma. That part of the country is not really my specialty when it comes to the geography, but we are welcoming in our friend Collin Kennedy from Sooners Illustrated. CK, I guess OU, I hear, has landed 4 commitments in this month alone. What's causing all of the recent success?
In one word, genuine. More on that in a second, but to further your point with a little bit more context, you mentioned 4 commits in 2025 alone in the month of April. 7 total commits in April between the transfer portal all the way to the 2027 recruiting cycle. More on both of those in a second. But when it comes to 2025 and these guys that are making a ton of decisions right now, the word is genuine because literally it's one of the first words these recruits mentioned to me when I asked them to describe this coaching staff. And it's a firm belief of everyone employed at OU in that football facility right now. They are trying to become and continuing to be one of the more relational, open, honest, transparent coaching staffs in college football. I think recruits appreciate that. This sport right now is becoming more transactional than ever before. And so to continue to prioritize and build relationships, it pays off. You're seeing the proof in the pudding. And somehow the statistics prove Brent Venables and crew are recruiting at a higher level than former head coach Lincoln Riley. And as long as they stay on this current trend, I don't see this changing anytime soon, the way that they treat recruits and their families.
I mean, they hope that this start to the spring could continue in the month of April. I know that Sooners fans are waiting to hear an update about top 247 cornerback Cobey Sellers. He is set to announce his finalists, I believe, on Tuesday. So where do the Sooners stand in the race for his services?
Yeah, this recruitment's heating up a little bit. The timeline might be accelerating. And if you're an Oklahoma fan or even in that Oklahoma facility that I was talking about earlier, you're probably getting to the edge of your seat because if that's the case, Oklahoma has been seen as the leader for several months, and rightfully so. Every time Cobey goes to campus, those trips go incredibly well. He's built very strong relationships within Oklahoma's coaching staff and on the current roster. A number of the other recruits currently committed are constantly recruiting Cobey himself. And I think this is one that OU has felt a time or two they were just on the verge of locking down. But in the words of the great Lee Corso, not so fast, my friend. I do have a crystal ball in for Oklahoma, Emily. But I actually think Texas A&M is making a serious push here behind the scenes. Some of those commits we talked about earlier, they landed 2 cornerbacks in the month of April, did Oklahoma. And I think as that happened, as that took place, Texas A&M worked behind the scenes to recruit Cobey, and it's paid off. Had a conversation with a few sources. I think Cobey's thoroughly impressed with that new A&M coaching staff. He had a prior relationship with Jordan Peterson, who's on staff. He was very impressed with some of the other defensive back staffers currently in College Station. And so I like how Oklahoma has treated this recruiting process for months, but A&M's really made a push going down the stretch here. And so if that timeline is getting accelerated, and I have some news very soon on that front, it could become a battle between Oklahoma and Texas A&M.
All right, well, at the very least, we'll find out his finalists tomorrow. Looking forward to hearing that. Outside of him, just overall looking at the Sooners class, 14 total commitments, number 6 in the nation. Fantastic start. So what's next?
Yeah, I'm going to first start with an in-state offensive lineman, Anthony Ogamoro, just down the road in Elgin, Oklahoma, set to make a decision on May 21st, so going into next month. Where do things stand? I like Oklahoma putting the crystal ball. OU offensive line recruiting heavily discussed this cycle after a strong defensive line haul, wanting to continue to shore up those lines of scrimmage. I think Oklahoma's in a prime position here with an intriguing prospect in state. Anthony Ogamoro hasn't been playing football long, but especially after his trip to Norman for the spring game, I think Oklahoma's in the driver's seat here. He'll continue to take visits, but OU might be able to add an offensive frontliner to the cycle very soon. CJ Nixon, another in-state recruit who doesn't get talked about a ton, mainly because he kind of keeps to himself, but in talking to sources, OU's still very confident in the way things are going there. And then I think if you're Oklahoma, you're going to continue to figure out what other spots you want to fill and fill fast, because on that note of the 2025 cycle and all of these commits coming in, a storyline that's emerged out of Norman is relatively sticky when it comes to scholarship spots right now. They have 14. Don't think they can take much more than 21 to 23 unless they really work the numbers. So I think that's the other thing that's next for Oklahoma. How are they going to navigate these scholarship numbers as they prepare for official visit season and even some pending decisions going into the month of May?
So that's a near-term future question, but I have to ask you this. This really stood out to me watching defensive lineman Zane Rowe from the 2027 class committing to Oklahoma recently. 2027, I believe those are freshmen, rising sophomores. It's going to be a long time until we see him play college football for Oklahoma, but what was it that made this staff want to lock him up so early?
Literally everything. But the more in-depth answer would basically be this. If there's a 2027 recruit out there who checks more boxes than Zane Rowe, I definitely like to see that recruit because it's part of my job. But specifically in the state of Texas, Emily, this 2027 cycle, I've said this on social media a couple of times, I don't know what it is, but there's already a ton of 27s in Texas who look like they're paying mortgages. I don't know what kind of water they're drinking. I would like some. But Zane Rowe is chief among them, and it's fascinating because you look at him, 6'4", 220, going to play a hybrid edge for one of the proudest programs in the state of Texas, in Denton Guyer, some 7-tech, some wide 9, maybe some off-ball linebacker. Fascinating considering the athletic profile. But then, again, a testament to his talents. The guy's also going to play some two-way snaps as a tight end. And keep in mind, folks, Guyer has a high-level rising senior tight end recruit who has quality group of 5 offers. So they don't technically need him to play tight end, and yet they're going to let him play both sides of the ball. But I think the best thing about Zane Rowe, in my opinion, is not just the athletic profile or what he can do. It's the mentality. He's wise beyond his years, and if you read the commit story that I published whenever he announced, one of the most fascinating things to me is he talked about how he likes to play tight end, not because of receiving yards or touchdowns. He wants to command attention away from his teammates so they can get the ball in favorable situations. Asked him what he loves about defense. It wasn't about the sacks, the tackles for loss, the individual statistics. He said he likes to just hit people, disrupt game plans. You just don't hear rising sophomores talk that way, Emily. So I love this guy, one of my favorite recruits I've ever covered. And if you're Oklahoma, you take him right now. Dare I say get excited, too, about a 2027 because I think he's a special talent, a really special kid.
Wow, they have lots of time to learn more about him, but from what you've told us so far, sounds like a really special kid. Looking forward to seeing what happens with the rest of his high school career and then when he suits up for the Sooners in a decade or so. Seems like it's going to be a long time from now. Let's hop in the portal real quick because things do close up shop tomorrow. TCU defensive lineman Damonic Williams, top 10 name in my book, but a priority for the Sooners to lock him up. What's the latest in their recruitment of him?
Yeah, we're entering the home stretch here for one of the most coveted players in the transfer portal. We'll visit LSU, I believe, beginning tonight, so our guys over at Go 24/7, I'm sure, will have this thing covered. But then it's almost decision time for this guy. Now, you hear some rumblings. He may make the final call as early as this Wednesday, but it is worth noting just because the transfer portal window is closing doesn't mean decisions have to be made. And kind of my personal belief, if you're a coveted defensive lineman in the transfer portal, no need to rush into any decision. You have the ability to navigate the process, and rightfully so. So for Damonic Williams, it's still kind of a mixed pot. You got Texas, you've got Missouri, LSU visit beginning soon. Oregon has generated some buzz a time or two. But then you mentioned Oklahoma, and it's fascinating to me because immediately upon entering the transfer portal, he gets that OU visit scheduled. At the time, it was the only multi-day trip he had on the slate. Spent about 3 days in Norman for OU spring game weekend. Went incredibly well, productive meeting with the coaching staff. It seemed like they were almost close to getting the deal done, but he left campus uncommitted, and you just kind of wait and see what happens from there. But what I want to say, OU is very optimistic because even though his attention went elsewhere during these visits, interesting little nugget, as Damonic Williams was visiting a different program, Oklahoma became the first ever offer for his younger brother. And so a very special moment created by the Sooners while Damonic and his younger brother are elsewhere, continuing to try to further that relationship. And going back to the beginning of this thing, OU prioritizes that relational aspect, so we'll see if it pays off. One of the best transfer portal defensive tackles available.
Love the strategy there, and I appreciate you pointing out, too, just from a defensive line standpoint, it seems like those guys are just the belle of the ball in this transfer portal. So, yeah, he can take his time, although I'm sure Sooners fans would like to have this one wrapped up sooner. That was intentional, rather than later. CK, thank you. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it. You can read more of his work at SoonersIllustrated.com. They have updates on spring practice, transfer portal, all the recruiting news that you could possibly want. Check it out on SoonersIllustrated.com.